the wind test yesterday.
How was that?
Useless. It was the easiest like standardized test that I think I've ever taken.
That's what Jenny said too.
It was. It felt like the most. It felt like I wasted 4 hours of my time taking a basic knowledge test.
Oh, that's kind of dumb.
It was just like, can you deal with difficult people in the workplace? Can you deal with coworker drama? Do you have common sense in how to deal with situations?
Is there an answer that's like, I'd rather not, but
There's like, okay, so what you have to do is you would get like a situation and you get 4 choices of what you should do in that situation, and then you have to pick a best answer and a worst answer.
Mhm.
And so it would be like, this person, this coworker has recently started being rude towards you. What should you do? And it'd be like, be rude right back to them so they know how it feels. Be nice to them so they feel bad. And then it would be like, speak with them or like talk to them and ask if you want to help with anything. And then just go directly to the supervisor.
Mhm.
And it's like, which one's the best and which one's the worst? So you would be like, I think talking to them would be the best one, and I think being rude to them would be the worst.
Yeah, that's fair and like not that hard to figure out.
Well, some of them were actually hard. That was the hardest part of the test.
Yeah.
Because it was like, there was a math section, and it's just like, can you use a calculator? Can you look at charts? Can you read a little bit of information and
Hmm.
determine an answer for an easy question?
Yeah. Interesting. And then it just tells you like your from what Jenny was saying, it's like you're 35% ready to be a teacher or like 20% ready to be a businessman or whatever.
Like, I think on mine, I got like 4 out of 5. That's what I think. I couldn't see like my results for that stuff.
Okay. Yeah.
When I looked at like my scoring, I got like 4 out of 5.
Oh, okay.
5.
Yeah,
So I was like, that's pretty good. If this was an AP exam, I would be proud of that score.
for sure.
I wish AP exams were that easy.
I know, I do too. It wouldn't be so hard to teach. I wish we had AP Lit here.
Yes, they have that in Avenue.
Really? I would love to teach it.
You would be a good teacher for AP Lit too.
I would really like it. We have AP Lang, but it's just not as fun.
Is that a senior's class?
It's juniors. Like if you weren't taking English 3 right now, you'd be in that. But it's kind of like it's just so much writing, which like of course it is, but just like
That's why I chose English 3.
analyzing like why people write things the way that they write it, and it's not fiction at all. It's like all nonfiction and like reading essays and stuff, and it's just like it can be fun, but my group this year is tough.
I'd rather read historical fiction than nonfiction any day.
I think I would too.
Even though like historical fiction can be pretty boring, it's better.
Some of it's
than
good.
nonfiction.
Yeah, for the most part, yeah. I mean, like there's some nonfiction that I like, but
Oh yeah, because it's like informative, and you're like, oh yeah, this is like.
yeah.
I read books like about civil rights and stuff, and those books are really good.
Mhm.
But then there's ones that are like
Just
the
boring.
Civil War.
I know.
nonfiction, And it's like, ew.
I don't care about that.
Hi.
Hello.
Hello, I'm leaving at 11:30ish.
Okay.
Going out of town again.
Lucky you. Where are you going this time?
We're going to the Highlands, North Carolina.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, it looks really fun.
It's closer to where I grew up. That is a good one.
It's also got word search.
Yeah, we're doing waterfalls and canoeing and.
Ooh, that'll be fun.
I want to go.
I know, right? Me too. I need some kind of
summer.
vacation.
I used to go to camp for a whole month, but I aged out, and now they just
Huh.
have a senior thing, so I'm going for 3 days. And you go whitewater rafting, like zip lining, and do all these things.
That sounds fun.
I used to like going for a month because you're just away and you're in nature. And
Yeah.
You don't have your phone.
I think that's fun. I know some people would go insane. Like year before last, Miss Kathan and Mr. Benvenuti and I took a cruise for spring break, and you just like have to pay a lot extra to have like internet access or to text and stuff because you're out in the middle of the ocean. So I told my sister that I was like, I won't be able to get in touch with you for the next week because I'm going to be out in the middle of the ocean. And she was like, why would you ever want to do that? I was like, there's so many other fun things. Like, I'm not even really going to be thinking about how I don't have my phone.
It's also really good for your mental health.
It's
Stay
very
away from
good.
outside world.
Yeah, 100%. I've definitely had to go on a couple of like social media, like
It's 11
vacations.
o'clock.
Thank you. Cade's here. Okay, we're missing a few, but we got to get a move on because we're gonna finish the book today.
Yay.
We don't have Alexis or Jenny. Let me
You want
plug
to
in
text
here.
Alexis?
Sure, why not? It doesn't bother me.
I'll just text Kat because she's with Kat right now, and I'll be like, y'all better be class.
We're finishing the book. It's important. I wrote this song. Looking at- Okay. So we left off at the bottom of page 76. I'm gonna share my screen with you just a minute here. But Ethan is like taking Maddie to the train station or the depot or whatever, and this is like their last time together, and they're finally starting to like here at the last minute, they're finally starting to like talk about their feelings. And he's like, if I could have managed to run away with you, would you have done it? And she basically says yes. Like, I think about it all the time about being with you. And then they say that crazy stuff about how like he's like, I don't know, like I'd almost rather have you dead than marry someone else. And she's like, I wish I was dead. And she's pretty insistent on it. He's like, don't say that, don't say that. And she's like, no, I mean it. I think about dying all the time. It's not great.
That's a mental health issue. Right
That's a
there.
mental health issue. And like, you know, she's got it rough. She does have it rough. I'll admit that. She doesn't really have a home. She's been working for her very mean cousin and her cousin's husband that she has fallen in love with and thinks that they cannot be together. And now she's going off to do God knows what. She has no money. It's not looking great for Maddie. Not encouraging the way she's thinking, but I get it for her more than I get it for Ethan. I feel like that was a terrible thing to say. Like, I'd rather have you dead than marry someone else. But so right where we left off, they were saying like the snow is good for coasting, aka sledding, and we said that we would go. We were supposed to have gone last night, but everything got messed up. And Ethan's like, let's go now. Like, we've got a little bit of time. We can take the time and let's just do it. We've been talking about it so long. So that's literally where we left off. He said, come along. He's just kind of trying to postpone leaving her or having her leave him. So we're picking up here at the top of 77. Anyone want to read today?
Yes.
Okay, gotcha. Okay.
On the okay. But
top
the
of-
girl, right?
Yep.
But the girl, she faltered. The girl will be waiting at the station. We'll let her wait. You'd have to if she didn't. Come. The note of authority in his voice seemed to subdue her, and when he had jumped from the sleigh, she let him help her out, saying only with a vague feint of reluctance, but there isn't a sled around anywheres. Yes, there is, right over there under the spruces. He threw the bearskin over the sorrel, who stood passively by the roadside, hanging a meditative head. Then he caught Maddie's hand and drew her after him toward the sled. She seated herself obediently, and he took his place behind her, so close that her hair brushed his face. All right, Matt, he called out, as if the width of the road had been between them. She turned her head to say, it's dreadfully dark. Are you sure you can see? He laughed contemptuously. I could go down this coast with my eyes tied. And she laughed with him, as if she liked his audacity. Nevertheless, he sat still a moment, straining his eyes down the long hill, for it was the most confusing hour of the evening, the hour when the last clearness from the upper sky is merged with the rising night in a blur that disguises landmarks and falsifies distance. Now, he cried. The sled started with a bound, and they flew over the dusk, gathering smoothness and speed as they went, with the hollow night opening out below them and the air singing by like an organ. Maddie sat perfectly still, but as they reached the bend at the foot of the hill, where the big elm thrust out a deadly elbow, he fancied that she shrank a little closer. "Don't be scared, Matt," he cried exultantly, as they spun safely past it and flew down the second slope, and when they reached the level ground beyond and the speed of the sled began to slacken, he heard her give a little laugh of glee. They sprang off and started to walk back up the hill. Ethan dragged the sled with one hand and passed the other through Maddie's arm. "Were you scared I'd run into the elm?" he asked with a boyish laugh.
There we go.
"I told you I was never scared with you," she answered. The strange
It's kind of sweet.
The strange exultation of his mood had brought on one of his rare fits of boastfulness. "It is a tricky place, though. The least swerve, and we never have come up again. But I can measure distances to a hair's breadth. Always could." "Huh? Okay," she murmured. "I always say you've got the surest eye." Deep silence had fallen with the starless dusk, and they leaned on each other without speaking. But at every step of their climb, Ethan said to himself, "It's the last time we'll ever walk together." They mounted slowly to the top of the hill, where, when they were abreast of the church, he stooped his head to her and to ask, "Are you tired?" And she answered, breathing quickly, "It was splendid." With the pressure of his arm, he guided her toward the Norway spruces. "I guess the sled must be Ned Hale's. Anyhow, I'll leave it where I found it." He drew the sled up to the Varnum gate and rested it against the fence. As he raised himself, he suddenly felt Maddie close to him among the shadows. "Is this where Ned and Ruth kissed each other?" she whispered breathlessly and flung her arms about him.
Maddie's getting.
She makes better moves than
She
he
does. She makes better moves than he does. Like the one time they ever kissed, he did not handle it well. But she's like,
She's like, "Hold on, grab him."
somebody else kissed here once. Let's you and me give it a go.
Okay. As he raised himself, she whispered restlessly and flung her arms about him. Her lips, groping for his, swept over his face, and he held her fast in a rapture of surprise. "Goodbye, goodbye," she stammered and kissed him again. "Oh, Matt, I can't let you go." He broke from him in the same old cry. She freed herself from his hold, and he heard her sobbing. "Oh, I can't go either," she wailed. "Matt, what'll we do?" They clung to each other's hands like children, and her body shook with desperate sobs. Through the stillness, they heard the church clock striking 5. "Oh, Ethan, it's time," she cried. He drew back to him. "Time for what? You don't suppose I'm going to leave you now? If I miss my train, where'd I go? Where are you going if you catch it?" She stood silent, her hands laying cold and relaxed in his. "What's the good of either of us going anywheres without the other one now?" he said. She remained motionless, as if she had not heard him. Then she snatched her hands from his, threw her arms about his neck, and pressed a sun-drenched cheek against his. Ethan, I want you to take me down again." "Down where?" "The coast, right off," she panted. "So we'll never come up anymore." "Matt, what on earth do you mean?" She put her lips close against his ear to say, "Right into the big elm. You said you could, so we never have to leave." Wow, okay.
Yeah. Let's talk about what she's saying here.
She's like, "You know what? Let's just end it all right here, right now. It is what it is." You know?
She's like, they've been saying the whole time. Yes, it's that same thing. What's the line? To die by your side would be such a heavenly way to die. That's kind of what she's saying. She's like, he made a joke on the last page about like, oh, do you think I'd run you into the big elm? No, I'm better at sledding than that. And she's like, no, really, like, let's do it. Let's just run into the elm. If you say like, there's no use. Oh, here comes Jenny. If you say there's no use in either of us going somewhere without the other, then let's never go anywhere without the other again. Let's just freaking end it all right
Love
now.
suicide, huh?
Love suicide.
They could
Messed
easily run away and take a train. They could easily do that, but no, you want to just end
She's
it all.
literally on her way to a train.
Yeah, like y'all could easily just run away on the train. Nobody's gonna ever know, and you want to end it all like that.
You did. Actually, I wrote this down that you said the other day because I thought it was like a pun without knowing it. Alyssa said it's already going so far downhill that there's nowhere else for them to go but die. Literally downhill.
They're about to die.
They're about to go down into the if he agrees. Let's keep going.
They're both crazy.
They're both crazy. They're both like
I'm
yeah,
both of
I'm
them going to
gonna die.
agree.
You know what? If they do, listen. If they do, I would not be mad. Okay, I would not be mad.
Like at this point, it's just like Maddie. I did not think Maddie would be the one to initiate it.
I know.
Yeah.
But you know, to be honest, she's got like less to lose than he does. She doesn't even know where she's going after she gets off this train. And she's like, what's gonna happen if I miss my train? He's like, what's gonna happen if you make your train? Where are you even gonna go? Like, the only place she's going is away from there. She doesn't have a plan. She doesn't have a job. She doesn't really have family.
She doesn't have money.
She doesn't have money. She's kind of at the end of her rope here.
Like either way, I feel like she would end up.
I know, she's just more like young and lively. You'd think that since he's like kind of sad and mopey and emotional all the time, that he would be the one to suggest it, but nope.
Okay. Matt, what on earth do you mean? She put her lips close against his ear to say, right into the big elm. You said you could, so we never have to leave each other anymore. Why? What are you talking of? You're crazy. I'm not crazy, but I will be if I leave you. Oh, Matt, he groaned. She tightened her fierce hold about his neck. Her face lay close to his face. Ethan, where'll I go if I leave you? I don't know how to get along alone. You said so yourself just now. Nobody but you is ever good to me. And there'll be that strange girl in the house, and she'll sleep in my bed where I used to lay nights and listen to hear you come up the stairs. The words were like fragments torn from his heart. Oh, hold on. I can't get past that statement just now. I tried just now. I can't.
Where she used to lay in bed and listen to him coming up the stairs.
Listen, I don't understand why both of them are so weak. They're so weak. You're weak. Why won't y'all say no? Because they should have said something to each other if they liked each other. She knew that he liked her, and he knew that she liked him. So why would y'all say nothing? Instead, y'all gotta both be awkward. Like, this doesn't make any sense. No. I don't. This is disgusting.
I agree
They're
with you
weak.
at a certain point. I don't think that he necessarily knew that she felt that way, because he did go back and forth, even like when he was watching her, or when they were walking home together. He was like, oh no, I feel like maybe she does like me, but I'm scared that she doesn't. But does she? I can't say anything. Like, he wasn't sure enough to make a move, but like, she was sure that he liked her. It was obvious the whole time. I mean, Xena knew it. She knew it. Everybody knew it. I agree with you. Why didn't they just?
Y'all should have did something. And now y'all in the situation. Anyway.
And now you're contemplating suicide.
Yeah, like, come on.
Together.
Really? This is. Ugh. Okay. The words.
Yeah, I mean, it's basically like a murder-suicide pact.
No, not murder. It's a love suicide pact, because they're both agreeing like, hey, I love you, you love me. We both can't look at each other. We both don't want to be in this situation, so let's just end it together.
Hypothetically,
well, a murder-suicide pact, though, pact implies that they're both in on it. So it kind of is like, if he's the one driving, the sled. I mean, it is murder suicide.
Yeah, because he killed her and killed himself. So
Mhm.
let's just say hypothetically that they do this. I don't think they will, but let's say hypothetically they do.
Over there
Okay.
trying to get hit by a double decker bus.
Exactly. Like, what if one of them dies but the other one doesn't? What are they gonna do?
Okay.
Ugh.
If he's Maddie, then he would do it.
Let's keep reading because he
Okay.
thinks of this in a minute.
The words were like fragments torn from his heart. With them came the hated vision of the house he was going back to, of the stairs he would have to go up every night, though of the woman who would wait for him there, and the sweetness of Maddie's avowal,
The vowel, her promise.
avowal, the wild wonder of knowing at last that all that had happened to him had happened to her too, made the other vision more I know what this word is.
Abhorrent.
Abhorrent. The other life more intolerable to return to. Her pleading still came to him between short sobs, but he no longer heard what she was saying. Her hat had slipped back and he was stroking her hair. He wanted to get the feeling of it into his hand so that it would sleep like a seed in the winter. Once he found her mouth again, and they seemed to be by the pond together in the burning August sun, but his cheek. Once he found her mouth again, and they seemed to be by the pond together in the burning August sun, but his cheek touched hers. And what kind of sentence is that?
It is once is saying that like one time he found her mouth again, not like after he found her mouth again.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
But his cheek touched hers, and it was cold and full of weeping. And he saw the road to the flats under the night and heard the whistle of the train up the line.
Don't scroll. Okay. Whew, got it. It's a first. I think that's literally the first time.
The spruces swathed them in blackness and silence. They might have been in their coffins underground. He said to himself, perhaps it'll feel like this. And then again, after this, I shan't feel anything. Suddenly he heard the old sorrel whinny across the road and thought, he's wondering why he doesn't get his supper. Come, Maddie whispered, tugging at his hand. Her somber violence constrained him. She seemed the embodied instrument of fate. He pulled the sled out, blinking like a night bird as he passed from the shade of the spruces into the transparent dusk of the open. The slope below them was deserted. All of Starkfield was at supper, and not a figure crossed the open space before the church. The sky, swollen with the clouds that announced a thaw, hung as low as before a summer storm. He strained his eyes through the dimness, and they seemed less keen, less capable than usual. He took his seat on the sled, and Maddie instantly placed herself in front of him. Her hat had fallen in the snow, and her lips were in her hair. He stretched out his legs, drove his heels into the road to keep the sled from slipping forward, and bent her head back between his hands. And then suddenly he sprang up again. Get up, he ordered her. It was the tone she always heeded, but she cowered down in her seat, repeating vehemently, whatever. No, no, no. Get up. Why? I want to sit in front. No, no. How can you steer in front? I don't have to. We'll follow the track. They spoke in smothered whispers. Spoke in smothered whispers as though the night were listening. Get up, he urged her, but she kept on repeating, why do you want to sit in front? Because I want to feel you holding me, he stammered, and dragged her to her feet. The answer seemed to satisfy her, or else she yielded to the power of his voice. He bent down, feeling in the obscurity for the glassy slide worn by preceding coasters, and placed the runners carefully between.
I hate to stop in the middle of a sentence, but I want to address this before we move on. Him wanting to sit in front is not just because like he wants to feel her holding him as they die. That's sweet, but it's more than that. She's like, how can you steer if you're not in front, or if you like usually you steer from behind, I guess, in sledding. But if you think about it, this is kind of what we were just saying. he wants to get hit first. He wants to have the brunt of the impact because if he's got to save one of them, he's gonna save Maddie. Which, like, at this point, I'm like, does she deserve that? I don't even like this whole thing was her idea, but it's also like it sucks, but it's also sort of weirdly kind of him. Like he's intending for them both to die, but if they don't, if only one of them lives, he wants to make sure that it's Maddie. So, blah blah blah. It's edges.
Oh, it's Edges, sorry. She waited while he seated herself with crossed legs in the front of the sled. Then she crouched quickly down at his back and clasped her arms about him. Her breath in his neck set him shuddering again, and he almost sprang from his seat. But in a flash, he remembered the alternative. She was right. This is better than parting. He leaned back and drew her mouth to his. Just as they started, he heard the sorrel's whinny again, and the familiar wistful call, and all the confused images it brought with it went with him down the first reach of the road. Halfway down, there was a sudden drop, then a rise, and after that, another long, delirious descent. As they took wing for this, it seemed to him that they were flying indeed, flying far up into the cloudy night, with Starkfield immeasurably below them, falling away like a speck in space. Then the big elm shot up ahead, lying in wait for them at the bend of the road, and he said between his teeth, "We can fetch it. I know we can fetch it." As they flew toward the tree, Maddie pressed her arms tighter, and her blood seemed to be in his veins. Once or twice, the sled swerved a little under them. He slanted his body to keep it headed from the elm, repeating to himself again and again, "I know we can fetch it," and little phrases she had spoken ran through his head and danced before him on the air. The big tree loomed bigger and closer as they bore down on it. He thought, "It's waiting for us. It seems to know." But suddenly his wife's face with twisted, monstrous lineaments thrust itself between him and his goal, and he made an instinctive movement to brush it aside. The sled swerved in response, but he righted it again to keep it straight and drove down the black projecting mass. There was a last instant when the air shot past him like millions of fiery wires, then the elm. The sky was still thick, but looking straight up, he saw a single star and tried vaguely to reckon whether it was Sirius or the effort tired him too much, and he closed his heavy lids and thought he would sleep. The stillness was so profound that he heard a little animal twittering somewhere nearby under the snow. It made a small frightened cheep like a field mouse, and he wondered languidly if it were hurt. Then he understood that it must be in pain so excruciating that he seemed mysteriously to feel it shooting through his own body. He tried in vain to roll over in the direction of the sound.
Yeah, curses.
And stretched his left arm out across the snow. And now it was as though he felt rather than heard the twittering. It seemed to be under his palm, which rested on something soft and springy. The thought of the animal's suffering was intolerable to him, and he struggled to raise himself and could not, because a rock or some huge mass seemed to be laying on him. But he continued to finger about cautiously with his left hand, thinking he might get hold of the little creature and help it. And all at once he knew that the soft thing he touched was Maddie's hair, that his hand was on her face. He dragged himself to his knees, the monstrous load on him, moving with him as he moved, and his hand went over her face, and he felt the twittering came from her lips. He got his face down close to hers, with his ear to her mouth, and in the darkness he saw her eyes open and heard her say his name. "Oh, Matt, I thought we fetched it," he moaned, and far off up the hill he heard the sorrel whinny and thought, "I ought to be getting to him to his feed."
That's a pretty rough scene. And I feel like it's pretty cinematic just with the way that it doesn't even address like they crashed into the elm, blah blah. They're just like, and then the elm, and then he's like lying on his back looking up at the stars, and like maybe he has a concussion or something because he's not thinking like, oh god, this horrible thing just happened. He's thinking about like the stars and his horse and stuff. He's not focused on it. And then he hears this little like whimpering animal, he thinks, which winds up being Maddie. And he's like got the sled on top of him. She's nearby. They're both injured, injured at least. And it kind of at this point, I thought it was sort of funny. I didn't want to like remind you guys because you're like, I think Ethan's gonna die. We actually know that Ethan doesn't die because it's a frame narrative. And at the beginning, like all these years later, 24 years later, I think, Ethan's still there and he's like got a limp, and they keep talking about the smash up that happened, and like that was what happened to Ethan. But and he's got like a red gash across his forehead. And we learn all that before the beginning of even chapter 1. So we know that he made it out. We don't at this point know if Maddie has made it out. It certainly doesn't look good. And you guys watch Grey's Anatomy, it kind of reminds me of the plane crash with the way that she's like, it reminds me of little Grey in the plane crash. She's just like making little sounds and they're like, oh God, it's, that's a person making those sounds. So that's the end of the main narrative. We have a couple pages left. We're gonna kind of look back at the bigger picture with the engineer talking again, which if you guys will recall from the prologue or whatever you want to call it, he needed somewhere to stay for the night, and Ethan, or like he was traveling, Ethan was taking him somewhere and the snow was too bad. And so Ethan was like, you can stay here tonight. And he said, through this night, I put together this whole story of Ethan Frome and what happened to him. So we're about to see how it ends up. If Maddie is dead, if Xena has died by this time just from being sick, if they're both alive, are they still married? What's going on with them? So, oh my God, I'm gonna lose it. I have to scroll so slowly.
Okay, ready.
I can, but right now it is, but sometimes it just goes away and I'm like, ugh.
The querulous drone ceased as I entered Frome's kitchen, and of the two women sitting there, I could not tell which had been the speaker. One of them, on my appearing, raised her tall, bony figure from her seat, not as if to welcome me, for she threw me no more than a brief glance of surprise, but simply as set about preparing the meal which Frome's absence had delayed. I'm having a
slatternly. I don't actually know what that means though.
A slatternly calico wrapper hung from her shoulders, and the wisps of her thin gray hair were drawn away from a high forehead and fastened at the back by a broken comb. She had pale opaque eyes which revealed nothing and reflected nothing. Her narrow lips were the same sallow color as her face. The other woman, which much smaller and slighter, she sat huddled in the armchair near the stove. When I came in, she turned her head quickly toward me without the least corresponding movement of her body. Her hair was gray as her companions, her face as bloodless and shriveled, but amber tinted with swarthy shadows sharpening the nose and hollowing the temples. Under her shapeless dress, her body kept its limp immobility, and her dark eyes had the bright witch-like stare that disease of the spine sometimes gives. Even for that part of the country, that kitchen was a poor-looking place, with the exception of the dark-eyed woman's chair, which looked like a soiled relic of luxury bought at a country auction. The furniture was the roughest kind. The 3-course china plates and a broken-nosed milk jug had been set on a greasy table scored with knife cuts, and a couple of straw-bottomed chairs and a kitchen dresser of unpainted pine stood meagerly against the plaster walls. My, it's cold it's cold here. The fire must be most out, From said, glancing about him apologetically as he followed me in. The tall women who had moved away from us toward the dresser took no notice, but the other from her cushioned niche answered complainingly in a high, thin voice, "It's only just been made up this very minute. Zena fell asleep and slept ever so long, and I thought I'd be frozen stiff before I could wake her up and get her to tend to it." I knew that then that it was she who had been speaking when we entered. Her companion who was just coming back to the table with the remains of cold mince pie in the battered pie dish, set down her unappetizing burden without appearing to hear the accusation brought against her. Frome stood hesitatingly before her as she advanced. Then he looked at me and said, "This is my wife, Miss Frome." And after another interval, he added, turning toward the figure in the armchair, "And this is Miss Maddie Silver."
So before we continue, let's just take a minute and look at what their roles are at this point. If y'all remember back in the beginning, and it's been a long time, so you might not remember, the engineer keeps saying he's hearing this like querulous drone from inside the house. And as we read, it seems more and more like that's probably Zena, because we know that's what she's like. She's whiny, she's sickly, she's nagging, and that's kind of her tone all the time. But when we actually look back at this at the end, one woman is like tall and I mean, like, everybody's kind of old at this point, or oldish, but she's like walking around taking care of the other two and like serving food and lighting fires and stuff. And the other one is like shriveled in this little chair, and she's complaining, and she's like, "It's too cold in here," and blah blah. And Maddie or Zena didn't do this, Zena didn't do that, she slept too long. And that's kind of the exact opposite of what they were at the beginning of this story. Like when they were young, before the smash up, Maddie was the one doing everything for them, caring for them, and Zena was the one who was like sitting around sickly and complaining all the time. And their roles have just completely flipped now. And it seems like Maddie is the sickly, nagging, querulous one who's just like picking at Zena for no reason. Nobody died.
Well, that's disappointing.
Furthermore,
And they didn't even die.
they didn't even die. The three of them are just stuck together now.
That's awful.
I mean, she didn't leave, but she basically, this person that he loved, that he wanted to leave his wife for, became essentially what his wife is. And they didn't have to part ways. They got to stay together, but she became this thing that he hated, that he was trying to get away from. It's so sad and messed up. Like, this is not how any of us wanted for this to end, including him.
This isn't even a realist story at this point. This is just ridiculous. This is not real.
It's ridiculous, but it's sad.
Beneath their wondering exclamations, I felt a secret curiosity to know what impressions I had received from my night in the Frome household, and divined that the best way of breaking down their reserved ways was to let them try to penetrate mine. I therefore confined myself to saying in a matter-of-fact tone that I had been received with great kindness, and that Frome had made a bed for me in a room on the ground floor, which seemed in happier days to have been fitted up as a kind of writing room or study. Well, Mrs. Hale mused, in such a storm, I suppose he felt that he couldn't do less than to take you in. But I guess it went hard with Ethan. I don't believe but what you're the only stranger has set foot in that house for over 20 years. He's that proud he don't even like his oldest friends to go there. and I don't know as any do anymore except myself and the doctor. You still go there, Mrs. Hale? I ventured. I used to go a good deal after the accident when I first married. But after a while, I got to think it made him feel worse to see us. And then one thing and another came, and my own troubles. But I generally make out to drive over there around about New Year's and once in the summer. Only I always try to pick a day when Ethan's off somewheres. It's bad enough to see the two women just sitting there, but his face when he looks round that bare place just kills me. You see, I can look back and call it up in his mother's day before their troubles. Old Mrs. Varnum by the time had gone up to bed, and her daughter and I were sitting alone after supper in the austere seclusion of the horsehair parlor. Mrs. Hale glanced at me tentatively, as though trying to see how much footing my conjectures gave her. What is it?
Conjectures, like
Conjectures.
his guesses or assumptions.
Okay. Gave her. And I guessed that if she had kept silence till now, and it was because she had been waiting through all those years for someone who should see what she alone had seen. I waited to let her trust in me gather strength before I said, yes, it's pretty bad seeing all three of them there together. She drew her mild brows in a frown of pain. It was just awful from the beginning. I was here in the house when they They laid Maddie Silver in the room you're in. She and I were great friends, and she had what was to have been my bridesmaid in spring. When she came I went up to her and stayed all night. They gave her things to quiet her, and she didn't know much until
Toward
toward morning. And then all of a sudden she woke up just like herself and looked straight at me out of her big eyes, and said, oh, I don't know why I'm telling you all this. Mrs. Hale broke off crying. She took off her spectacles and wiped the moisture from them and put them on again with an unsteady hand. It got about the next day, she went on, that Zena Fromm had sent Maddie off in a hurry because she had a hired girl coming, and the folks here could never rightly tell what she and Ethan were doing that night coasting, and when they'd ought to have been on their way to the flats to catch the train. I never knew myself what Zena thought. I don't to this day. Nobody knows what Zena's thought. Anyhow, when she heard of the accident, she came right in and stayed with Ethan over to the ministers where they had carried him. And as soon as the doctor said that Maddie could be moved, Zena sent for her and took her back to the farm. And there she's been ever since. Mrs. Hale answered simply. There was nowhere else for her to go, and my heart tightened at the thought of the hard compulsions of the poor. Yes, there she's been, Mrs. Hale continued. And Zena done for her and done for Ethan as good as she could. It was a miracle considering how sick she was. But she seemed to have been raised right up just when the call came to her. Not as she's ever given up doctoring, and she's had 6 spells right along. But she's had the strength given to her to care for those two for over 20 years. And before the accident came, she thought she couldn't even care for herself. Mrs. Hale paused for a moment, and I remained silent, plunged in the vision of her words evoked. It's horrible for them all, I murmured. Yes, it's pretty bad, and they ain't any of easy people either. Maddie was before the accident. I never knew a sweeter nature, but she suffered too much. And that's what I always say when folks tell me how she's soured. And Zena, she was always cranky. Not but what she bears with Maddie wonderful. I've seen that myself. But sometimes the two of them get going at each other, and then Ethan's face break your heart. When I see that, I think it's him that suffers the most. Anyhow, it ain't Zena, because she ain't got the time. It's a pity, though. Beneath their one, okay. Mrs. Hale ended sign that they're all shut up there in that one kitchen. In the summertime, on pleasant days, they move Maddie into the parlor or out in the dooryard, and that makes it easier. But winters, there's the fire to be thought of, and there ain't a dime to spare up at the Fromms. Mrs. Hale drew a deep breath as though her memory were eased of its long burden, and she had no more to say. But suddenly an impulse of complete avowal seized her. She took off her spectacles again and leaned toward me across the beadwork table cover and went on with the lowered voice. There was one day, about a week after the accident, when they all thought Maddie couldn't live. Well, I say it's a pity she did. I said it right out to our minister once, and he was shocked at me. Only he wasn't with me that morning when she first came to. And I say if she had died, Ethan might have lived. And the way they are now, I don't see there's much difference between the Froms at the farm and the Froms down in the graveyard, except that down there they're all quiet and the women have got to hold their tongues.
Man, the end. I love that last little speech by Mrs. Hale. It's ridiculously sad, but you know, she's saying that it would have been better. They would have all been better off if Maddie had just died. The accident changed her. She suffered too much, both physically and emotionally, and she never really recovered from it. And she has this like miserable life. And Ethan's miserable, and Xena, all of a sudden, Xena's doing the best out of all of them. And in fact, I think it's really interesting that she said, where is this? Xena's done for her and for Ethan as good as she could. It was a miracle considering how sick she was, but she seemed to be raised right up just when the call came to her.
Wow.
She's had the strength to care for them, where like before the accident, she couldn't even take care of herself. It was like as soon as they got in the accident, she was like, all right, I got to get to work. I got to take care of these people. And like we always suspected that she was maybe exaggerating a little bit.
Because she was.
And I mean, to make this sudden recovery, it's like freaking Grandpa Joe and Willy Wonka just jumps out of bed after 20 years because there's a candy factory. I guess like taking care of people is kind of her version of the candy factory. Like she just wants to feel useful in this particular way. And it's so weird. Like I can't remember when it was, but they kind of said that someone said they thought that she was kind of playing this up for attention. Like she liked the attention that came with being sick. People knew her because she was sick, but now people know her because she is a caretaker and she cares for people who are sick because she has all this experience trying to take care of herself.
That's baloney.
It's baloney. And I also think that this last bit that Miss Hale is saying is really sad, but craftily done by the author, because the first we hear of the Froms in the graveyard, Ethan's walking past him with Maddie and he's like, oh, I wish that we could be like these Froms in the ground. If I could just be with you forever, it would be okay if we were dead. And now at the end, Miss Hale is saying he basically is exactly like his dead ancestors. He has no actual life, and all this stuff that kept him in Starkfield all this time, all this feeling of being stuck, it's not different now. He's more stuck than he ever was. And I think that's the real like realist part of it. The ending is a little bit not contrived, but there's a lot to it and it seems kind of improbable. But Ethan, you know, the whole thing is about him trying to feel like he's not stuck in this life that was kind of like forced upon him, and that Maddie would be his ticket out. And turns out he doesn't get out no matter what. He is with Maddie, you know, probably not romantically at this point because she seems awful. And he never, like, he and Xena are still married, but they don't have to part ways. They get to stay together, but they're just as stuck as he always was. Freaking tragic.
Awful. Absolutely awful.
That's true. And also, if Ethan hadn't insisted on sitting in the front, they might have actually died. And then there was that little bit where he like saw Xena's face for a second and he like brushed it aside. Like he made a physical motion and it kind of made the sled go off track for a second. And I thought that was really interesting because it's almost like giving her a little bit of the blame too, or like, him thinking of her was why they didn't actually die. It's wild. I need to show you guys what you're going to be doing, and I'll email you to remind you of this tomorrow. But you know that Friday and Monday are both e-learning days. You only have one thing to do during these two e-learning days, and it shouldn't be very difficult. I don't know why this looks insane. There we go. Before the end of the day on Monday, so this is due on Monday, everyone should come up with 4 open-ended discussion questions about the book. They can be from any part of the story and address plot points, character motivations, alternate outcomes, themes, color symbolism, any other stuff that you can think of. For help on writing open-ended discussion questions, I've put a presentation on here. I'll show it to you in just a sec about writing open-ended questions. And when I say open-ended questions or discussion questions, that does not mean yes or no questions or questions that have one simple, easy answer. Like, who is Ethan married to? The answer there is Xena. There's no room for discussion on that. It's not arguable. Questions that simply require us to recall what we've read are not open-ended. So your questions should foster some kind of discussion and analysis. If you look at this module here, I posted this open-ended questions thing. It's gonna try to download it, so I'm not gonna open it up. But it's like 4 slides. It's really fast. It's just giving you some hints and some examples from To Kill a Mockingbird, which a lot of you will have read. I think you're right. So just to kind of guide you about like what kind of questions. So I'll email you in the morning and also Monday morning to remind you to do this, but luckily we got through the book and the plan at this point, and I could still change the plan, but I would like to test next Friday on Ethan Frome, which gives us 4 days to review and get ready for a test. So, well, I mean, sort of 4 days, sort of more than 4 active class days. Okay. Bell's about to ring, so I'm going to let you guys go. Be on the lookout for an email from me, and I will see y'all Tuesday.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye. So weird.